Welcome to video 3 of the workflow series, and today we are basically going to handle the workflow events. We are going to publish, we are going to subscribe to the events that are usually system generated for workflows. We will use the approvals management code unit, the workflow event handling, workflow response handling code unit interchangeably where we need to use them. In the previous video, we basically looked at the custom workflow header table. We created the fields that are necessary. We made sure that the status is available. And if you haven't watched this video, please just go watch. Unless you're conversant with this concept, then you can proceed with this event creation for the workflow. Then the page is here that will display the information that is in this particular workflow custom workflow header table.
Hii ni tech na msangi ya jishinde.com.
So in creation of workflows, basically the idea is to mirror what has been done in the system. When we set up a workflow, the first one that we had set up was the workflow for a or for a general journal, and they had a template there, and everything has been created and it was just working well. And there's also a workflow that has been set up, or there's a template for a workflow for a vendor in the system by default. And in creation of these pages, page actions, I mirrored what the vendor workflow contains to make sure that I get everything right, from the request approval card to the approvals to the cancel approval to the reject, delegate, and all that. So here on now the custom workflow header, we need to make sure that we do have now our page, which will be, I think, the vendor card. I'll try and use this vendor card and let's learn what are they doing, what is happening when someone requests for approval. So ideally there is this approval management code unit that is called, so, and to check if the vendor approvals workflow is enabled, and then the approvals management code unit is also called again to send the vendor for approval. So these are the two methods that belong to the approvals management code unit that are called when a user requests for approval. So if I go to the definition of this check vendor workflow enabled, I'll find that yes, if not workflow management.can execute, there's this whole code here from the workflow management code unit as well. And then it confirms if you can be able to execute. And so this is just confirming that there is a setup for the workflow on the front end side. Have you set up that particular workflow, or is it just on the back end? And then here we now send that approval. So if the workflow hasn't been set up on the front end side, we throw an error, which is here, no workflow enabled error. But if it has been set up, we send approval request for the vendor. So what we'd like to check for us is for our document, we'd like to verify that the workflow has been enabled, and then we send the approval request for our particular custom workflow header table. So if we go to this particular definition, remember this is a read-only based application code unit that can't be changed. So we just need to mirror this particular functionality on our side. And the way we'll do it is by just creating a new code unit for the purpose of this demonstration, custom workflow management. Let me just call it that way and simply finish it. So in the approval management code unit, what we are trying to mirror is this: check vendor approval enabled. And so when we come to the custom workflow management, this will be a procedure to confirm if the workflow has been enabled. But we can make it a little bit better. Instead of having it refer to one static variable in form of a vendor, and so instead of having to change this now to the workflow, what do I want to call it, our workflow now code unit, our okay, our workflow, custom workflow header record here in the variables. So what we'll do, we will check workflow. Okay, we'll just check approval workflow enabled, but here our input will be a record ref instead of a record that is static. So then we confirm if we can execute, and we do have a call to the workflow management here, to this code unit, workflow management. So we can call this code unit and verify if we can be able to execute the workflow. So let me just do this. I don't need this other function. Workflow enabled workflow exists. Okay, because this is confirming if there is an enabled workflow on run workflow on vendor changed code. So we are not having this workflow on the code changed, so we are only focused on send approval. So this is why I'll remove that, and I'll remain with this code unit here that will throw an error if the value is true or false, so can execute workflow. So let's look at the input for this. So it takes in a variant. So a variant means it's a generic. It takes in a generic, so it can take any data type, but it expects it to be a record. The generic should be a record, because if we go into this can execute workflow, it will basically be able to get the variant, and the variant will go to a step where the variant will be converted to a record ref. So this record ref will get the table from the variant to make sure that now this variant which will be containing our record will be converted to a record ref. So at this point here, we just need to make sure that we can as well pass a record ref instead of having to pass this variant that is requested. And then we do have now a workflow event handling code unit that has this particular function, the run workflow on send vendor for approval code, but for us it will be now the run workflow on send document for approval code. On we can just go to this particular workflow event handling code unit in the base application again, and under the code units we can just search for anything that has a workflow in it, and then we will get the workflow event handling somewhere here as code unit number 1520. Come on, why am I double selecting? Then we go to definition and run workflow on, let's just search for it. What is happening here is we do have this function that is saying that we have the run workflow on send vendor for approval code, and there's a lot that is happening here. We have this and this and this and this. So this is the most important thing. This is a function with a return value of code of 128, and it exits a value that is just the run workflow on send vendor for approval and on send vendor for approval. So our work here, it was just to run the workflow on send vendor for approval. So if I look at this function, the most important thing is to exit a code of 128 characters, and not necessarily 128. As long as a code is exited, everything will be all right. So at this point here, I can create my own text or a code. So run workflow on send, where is this thing? Okay, so I'll just basically call it in this manner. My time is up. So we do have a code that says this. The code. So we can't define it as a code. We'll just define it as a label, but have its text being in form of a code. So the run workflow on send vendor for approval. So run workflow on send, instead of having vendor, we just say for approval. Then we say the txt here, or label, or let's say code, on send for approval code. So it will be the run workflow on send vendor for approval code, but here we will change it now to our placeholder character that will be replaced by whatever we'd like to use in our on send for approval. And then we will have our run workflow on cancel for approval code that will be replaced by on cancel for approval code, still on our side, to help us have it as a generic. So the other thing that we will do is we need to convert this to have it return on send custom workflow, on send booking header, whichever any other document that we'll have, it will be replaced by this particular placeholder character. So I'll just have a procedure to get the workflow code that will take now this code as an input and return the relevant the relevant data. So we'll have the workflow code, which will be a code of 128 characters as an input, as well as now a record ref to just make sure that we know which particular table we are dealing with here. Is a record ref. So it will exit a code of 128. So we are still exiting the code of 128 that we had initially initiated, only that we are going a little bit deeper to make sure that we use the generics in the best way possible. So at this point here, what we'll do is we now need to exit the value of now. So we'll use this function, the string substring no, to basically concatenate this code. So we are concatenating the workflow code, then with now the record ref dot caption. Okay, the name, we can use the name of that record ref. The name looks more better. It won't change as much. The caption can be changing from time to time again. So it means there should be some discipline in how the record ref is being created. And here we will just make sure that this record ref name does not have any space. So we will just delete any occurrence of a space in the record ref. So if there is a space in this record ref, we delete it and we exit the value of the workflow code with the name of this particular record ref. And in our workflow event handling, instead of having the workflow event handling get for us that particular run workflow on send vendor for approval code, we will just call our function that is here to enable us just get the workflow code but now with an input of our workflow code for send, and also an input of the record ref, and it will get us whichever workflow code that we need. So it will be run workflow on send, custom workflow header for approval, and then we need this function for error management. It was in workflow event handling. So this seems to be in the, was it in the event handling or response handling? Let me just confirm. Workflow event. Okay, I'm in the tables instead of the code units. So there's the workflow management. Should be in the workflow management code unit. Not really. Anyway, this is not a big deal. It's just that I wanted the uniformity will be a label that will say, okay, should be, okay, let's just get the generic one that they use. So here it is in the approvals management, and so there is the no approval for this record type is enabled. It's good to maintain these errors to be as common as possible to make sure that the users don't get confused that now this is a custom workflow. It has different errors compared to the base application workflow. So maintain the errors to just have that uniformity to give them an easier way of understanding. So even if you create for them custom workflows, they won't feel a big difference from any other workflow. But so this particular code here is trying to make sure that any generic workflow that we will create can use this, check workflow enabled, and after it has checked the workflow, that if the workflow has been enabled, we can now handle the event of the send and the cancel. So if we go back to our mirror here, once we check the workflow is enabled, we go ahead and call the approvals management code unit again, and we send vendor for approval. And at this point here, what we are doing is we are raising an event. Some silence a little bit. You know, when I mention events, at times some people just get some butterflies in the stomach. But events are very beautiful. So if you have butterflies in your stomach, just drink some water and let's go back to the event. So we are raising an event on send vendor for approval, and we are also, you see, we have several here. We have on send customer that are being raised. And I don't know why Microsoft didn't create a generic for this, because they could have helped us in not having to repeat for every other document. Okay, nonetheless, so we just need to raise this event. So it's an integration event, and it takes in a variable in form of a vendor or a customer or whichever. And we do have the same for on send, on cancel. So we will stick to one code unit. I know Microsoft has several code units for workflow management, workflow response handling, but for us, we'll stick to one code unit to raise the event and cancel the event. So what I'll do here is basically be able to change this to on send workflow for approval, and this one will be a record ref as well. Record ref references a record, so the name itself suggests I'm just referencing this record. So instead of having to use the vendor or whichever, or the customer or any other new table that we'll create, let's reference them using the record ref. So at this point, I can be able to look at this. This is on send workflow for approval. And then we should have another one for OnCancel. Okay. OnCancel workflow for approval. Still a record ref referencing that. So what we are doing here, the moment the user clicks on send approval, they publish this event. So if it's published, it means we need to subscribe to this event as well. And that's why the workflow event handling comes in, because the event handling by itself, the name suggests that it is handling the events for the workflows that have been sent. And when we come back here in our vendor card, we can see that now this is how we check if it's enabled, and then we send for approval, and we check if it's cancelled, and then we send for the cancellation. So I will basically add this functionality for the send in our workflow management. Where is our page? In our custom workflow header, let me add the functionality for the send and cancel, and then we will proceed for the next in the next video to handle the events. So let's just send, cancel, and then we go to the workflow event handling. So let's raise the event. What we are doing here is we have created the events to be published, but now let's publish these particular events. Workflow management or custom. What is the name of my code unit? Custom workflow management is the name of the code unit. And so we need that code unit, and the code unit takes in a record ref. So the first thing that we'll do is record ref. We'll just get the table that is the current record of the vendor, and once we get the record, we will basically now, once we get the record, we will now call this custom workflow management dot on send approval. Then we will definitely use the record ref. So if it's enabled, then we can call this particular workflow management again on send vendor or workflow for approval, still passing in this particular record ref. But okay, check workflow enabled. I used the wrong. We check the workflow enabled, and if the workflow has been enabled, then we can be able to send. So this is done, and on the other side, on the cancellation, we will still do the same. For the trigger on action, we will basically check. No need of checking if it's enabled, because by the time you cancel, it will already be enabled. So on cancel workflow for approval, because there is a problem because these variables have not been defined. Let's define them, and we'll be able to be done with our first action of sending and making sure that the page actions for the cancellation are available. So that's it for video 3 of this workflow. We are taking it step by step, not adding a lot of work, but let's make sure you've reached to this step before you move to the next video. So in the next step, we will now look at the workflow management or the workflow response handling. We want now to subscribe to the events that we have published. What we have done now is basically create a mirror of the approval management and the workflow management, but still we have used one code unit because it's our custom code unit, and we have used record refs instead of hard coding the particular tables, and we can be able to use record refs. So with the record refs, it means our code will be reusable in any other new table that we'll need to create. And at this point here, when you look at it, we do have a way of checking if the approval workflow has been enabled, and it will take in a record ref because the workflow management code unit itself takes in a variant. And this get workflow code will make sure that our run workflow on send and on cancel will be dynamic. So we'll have a way of getting them in a very dynamic way. The run workflow on send, run workflow on cancel for approval. To have them dynamic, it will change in every occurrence of a new table. And the delete character here is making sure that the table doesn't have any space. So if it gets its the character that is sent here as the input, the character that has run workflow on send, and then the table name replaced here, if it has got any space, then it will delete that particular character. So this is a space. So if it's equal to space, any space that is there will be deleted, and it will return to us a code that doesn't have a space, because we don't need a code with a space in this case. And then we can be able to now have published these events, and we have already set them up in the page just right now here in the page, to make sure that now they can be published when the user clicks. So they will be published on click button, and when they have been clicked, okay, when the user clicks on send and on cancel, they'll publish this particular event. So our work in the next video will be now to subscribe to these events that we have published. So I will see you in the next video, and take your time, take it slowly if you're doing it for the first time. And if you're doing a recap, maybe you can add some details that can be helpful for others in the comments, because we are all learning, and I believe we will get better at custom workflows. So I will see you in the next video as we handle the responses that have been published by our workflows.
If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, subscribe, and ring the notification bell so that you don't miss the next one.